Hi, this is a financial wellness course. We're going to take you through 3 different courses. This is course 1 of 3. I want to introduce myself. I'm Cindy Turman. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Schaefer.
And I'm Kyle Check. I'm Corporate Controller over in the Accounting Department for Creek Carrier.
So back in May of 2022, we sent drivers a survey to tell us about their financial wellness. We asked a series of questions. So some of the results that we got were 13% of drivers who answered. We had about just over 1,000 drivers answer this survey. So 13 of you said that you say you're buried in debt and don't know how to get out. 23% of you don't know how you'd cover $400 expense without borrowing the money. 38% of you don't have a budget that you follow closely. 42% live paycheck to paycheck, and almost 60% say they're not on track to retire when you want. So given that information, we tried to tailor a course that will take you through various different steps along our financial roadmap here. The first step will be budgeting. We're going to go through what a budget is, how to do a budget. The second piece will be debt elimination. So we're going to talk about how to decrease spending and potentially increase income. We're going to briefly touch on emergency fund. What is it? How much do you need? We're going to talk about kind of the basics of investing and saving. And then finally, building wealth, kind of that life after debt. What's the next chapter? So the first thing in this process is figuring out what your goals are. It's very important to start with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey said. Just like when you're building a house, you have a blueprint, you just don't go in there blank. So have a blueprint, understanding exactly what you're wanting. It's the same with retirement. Understanding, do you want to travel? Do you want to spend time with family? Do you want to volunteer? What is that? Having that strong why is going to get you through the process of going through debt elimination. Depending on the amount of debt, it's not an easy process. It's going to take a while. So having that deep sense of why is extremely important. So budgeting, why don't people budget? First of all, men say that 1.2 is likely say they don't feel like creating a budget. 1.3 times as likely on women that they never stick to a budget. So what are some of the reasons why people don't budget? Well, first of all, I don't know how to budget. We're going to help you solve that problem today. There are several people that have never budgeted before. It's not a difficult process. We'll take you through it. The second one is, I'm afraid what I will find. This is one of the most common ones. It's kind of stick your head in the sand. I am afraid of how much debt I am in and really don't want to face the facts. I'd rather just not know. The third one is, I have plenty of money. I don't need to do one. Everybody, no matter what income level, needs a budget of some sort. Every time I budget, I try and I fail. This is a common one too. It's kind of like the people that go on a diet and then they eat a piece of cake and so like, well, just blow the diet. Same sort of thing. Budgeting, you will go over, you will make mistakes, but you need to stay on track. And then lastly is I don't have the time, and I would say you have time for what you prioritize. So if budgeting and getting out of debt is important, that's something we need to make time for. So why is budgeting so important? It really has a negative connotation. The biggest thing is to know where your money's going. This allows you, a budget really is a positive thing. It allows you the freedom to spend money on what you want to spend money on without feeling guilty because you have those budgeted items. For example, if your thing is boots and you want to spend $100 a week on boots and you have that in your budget, then that's what you can do. So again, it's that guilt-free spending on things that you have budgeted for while you're reaching your goals. Lastly, it just provides a roadmap to achieve your financial goals. So an example that we have, so say you go to Love's, a truck stop, and get a coffee 6 days a week, and it's $2.68 each time you get that cup of coffee. Over a year, it's about $837. And then let's add on, hey, we're at a truck stop, we want to have a nice meal, at least 4 days a week while we're out on the road. That costs a little over $16, and it comes out to just over $3,300 a year. And then lastly, let's say 4 days a week we want to stop and when maybe we're on our break, we want to stop and get something to drink and maybe a snack. Say we do that 4 days a week at just over $6, and that's about $1,400 a year. So overall, that's $5,600 a year that we're just eating and drinking, and this isn't even all our meals and all of our drinks. So this is just doing it several times a week here. So instead, if we took that $5,600 and we invested it over 30 years, it adds up to over $765,000. So the first step in budgeting is we want to list all of our debts. So what is the total amount owed? What is the minimum monthly payment that we have? And what is the interest rate? So some things you need to think about. We want to see all your debts except for your mortgage. So things like if you have a boat loan or an RV or a motorcycle, or maybe you have a loan to a furniture store or loans to parents or friends, that all needs to be on the list. You can check your statements. You can go online to see what your interest rates are, to see what your minimum payments are, to get the rest of this. But this example below here is what we're going to be using as our example through this entire process. So in this example, we have a pickup truck payment over 20 grand, a car payment just about 10 grand, a credit card that's 1,800, and then a credit card that's almost 15,000. So this is what we're going to build upon in this scenario that we'll be going through. So step 2 is figuring out what kind of tool or form you want to use. We recommend the first time you're doing a budget is to do kind of pencil and paper. We do have a budgeting form that you can get to fill out. We do have some Excel templates if you're good in Excel, or that's something that you really like to do and use some formulas. There's also a lot of apps and websites out there. Below are these 4 different apps that are available. There are a lot of many free apps out there. There's some that we use, and you can pay money to get some extras on it. But there are a lot of them out there, so feel free to explore different apps to find out what works best for you and your family.
Okay, so then step 3 for the budgeting process is we're kind of getting into the meat and potatoes a little bit, I like to say, as we start to put together our budget and actually get numbers to paper here. So the first thing we want to do is start with our income. The first step in that process is finding out your total household monthly income. So that includes your income for yourself, your spouse, any kind of side income that you might have, rent income, alimony, if you get some child support, second job, side hustles, things like that. Whatever's bringing in money for you, that's what we all want to include in this income section of the budget. Since your paychecks are variable, there's different ways we want to look at how to do that as far as being as conservative as possible. So as you estimate maybe what the next month looks like for your income, how many miles you're expecting, what you expect that to look like, try to estimate as conservative as possible. That way if you shoot too low and you end up with more income than that, that's a positive thing, as opposed to shooting too high and then your budget you run out of budget for your income earlier in the month because you didn't have enough in there. So those are the things we kind of try to look at when we're looking at the income side. We would say for Creek Carrier driving employees to budget 4 paychecks per month. That's typically how many paychecks you receive on a weekly cycle. There are 4 months a year where you'll get that 5th paycheck, which is great, and we're going to use that in the future slides to talk about what you can do with that kind of a bonus paycheck. As long as you budgeted on 4 paychecks, that 5th one can be used as just kind of a little extra to do some more things with. So that's kind of how we'll approach the process from the income side of things. After that, we move on to step 4, which is accounting for all of your expenses. So when we talk about expenses, we want all of our expenses, meaning anything from your bank statements, your credit card statements, actual things that you pay for with true cash, whatever's causing an expenditure to your household, we want that to be included in this expense category. Now, when we look into the expenses, we kind of break them out into 3 different categories here. The first one being fixed expenses. So those are the kind of things that are pretty consistent each month. They kind of look through and say, okay, what is your rent or house payment? That's usually pretty consistent each month, and as well as some of your utilities, electricity, car payment, trash and water. All those things are pretty easy to budget because they're they're going to be about the same every month. So the other category, the next category we'd look at would be variable expenses. So these aren't quite as consistent, but they're still something that you probably have a pretty good idea of what they'll be. That would things in this area would be clothing, entertainment, restaurants, groceries, things of that nature. Couple words of caution in this category, one of them being on the groceries. So groceries is one where people traditionally under budget that. That's one where people undershoot it quite a bit. And the thing I would caution there is it's different than undershooting clothing, for instance. If you budget your clothing and you get to the 20th of the month and you've used up all your clothing budget, you can probably last another 10 days to the end of the month and not buy any more clothing until the next month comes around. But if you do that with groceries, you can't stop eating on the 20th of the month. So you want to make sure you leave enough cushion in your grocery budget to make sure you're going to get to that month. And you even shoot a little high on the groceries just to make sure that you have enough there so you don't run out before the month is over. And then there's that third category, the lump sum expenses. This is the tricky one. This is the one that can trip you up on your budget. This is where some surprises might be hiding. These are ones that aren't really recurring every month. They're more of a once a year, maybe twice a year, maybe once a quarter type expenses. So some examples that we have listed here, if you own your home outright, maybe real estate taxes are one that you'd pay maybe twice a year. Car tags, once a year. Homeowners insurance or car insurance, you might pay that on a once or twice a year basis. And then maybe just some annual subscriptions. Maybe you have something like a subscription fee to a grocery pickup service, or maybe you have some association dues or something like that that just come around annually, or maybe you pay fees for your child's sports season, whatever that might be. So on those, you want to try and think ahead and think about all those different things that don't happen every month that you want to account for throughout the year. So for instance, let's say I'm starting my budget here in January, and I know in December I'm going to have a $120 annual subscription to one of the associations that I'm a part of. Well, I know that I'm going to owe that $120, and if I look now, I've got 12 months until that payment is due. So what I would do in that scenario is take my 12 months that I have left and the $120, divide the $120 by the 12 months to say, okay, I need to budget $10 a month between now and then to make sure I have enough money available to me when I make that payment in December. That's a better approach than just waiting till December and then trying to find $120 in your December budget all in one month. So what we'd recommend is taking that $10 a month, for instance, in January, even though you didn't owe anything at this point in time, you'd take that $10, maybe put it in a separate bank account and let it accumulate there throughout the year. And then when that December payment comes due of $120, you've got that money sitting in that separate account that's ready for you to use and go ahead and make that payment. So that's just a way to help take some of those lump sum expenses and spread them out over the year to make it easier to budget more consistently on some of those expenses. Okay, so after we've got our income and our expenses lined out for our budget, we would then go into our looking where we're at. You know, we kind of try and balance it out. We want our budget to balance, meaning our income is at least as much as our expenses. So there's two scenarios that when you put this together and look at the math, where you'll end up. The first one being, what if my expenses are higher than my income? When you first start the budget, that's probably going to be the pretty common answer, right? When most of us start budgeting, we usually realize that we have more expenses than we do income, and we need to make some adjustments to make sure our budget balances. So the first option we can do there would be to trim expenses and trim those budget categories. So some of the low-hanging fruit in that area typically would be your dining expenses, your grocery expenses, maybe your cable bill. For dining, for instance, you would just try and watch how much you're eating out, and sometimes we do that more than we realize, and it really adds up. Try and cut back on some of that. Groceries, I mentioned earlier, are one that we try to overshoot the budget, but within that grocery category, there are opportunities to look at that and say, okay, could I buy some off-brand stuff? Could I buy some more generic labeled things as opposed to buying the name brand groceries and save some money that way? Those are ways to do that. Cable bills, you know, there's trends out there where people are moving more to streaming services as opposed to cable companies. There might be some opportunities there for savings. Just having some caution not to have too many streaming services, or you might end up paying more anyway in the end. Also, there's the good old-fashioned antenna. They're still available if you're in an area with some good reception to put an antenna on your roof. You can still get quite a few TV channels without paying for any type of cable service at all. So sometimes those are ways to cut back on some of those expenses, just some of the low-hanging fruit in those areas. The other thing you might want to try and do is increase your income. Take a look and see if there's any way to maximize your hours and minimum, or hours and miles at work to try and maximize your income that way. Or, the other thing that a lot of us have run into is over time in our homes, we accumulate a lot of things that we no longer need. Some of us have storage rooms that are full of things that might be valuable to others that we just simply don't use anymore. And you can take those items and go ahead and sell those online. There's a lot of ways to do that now. We'll talk about that in future slides here in this program. But you can also have a good old-fashioned garage sale and just make some money that way. So just some of those little items to make some extra income on the side might be possible as well. So the other option when balancing your budget, or the other scenario that you might run into, is if your income exceeds your monthly expenses. If that happens, well then fantastic. That's a great answer. If your income's already above what you expend, then you've got that opportunity to use that extra income to pay down some debt faster, do some other things to achieve some of those financial goals, and that's just a good way to approach it and a good spot to be in. That's kind of what we're working towards in this whole exercise. Okay, so now we want to kind of lay out this example in our scenario of our example family here, where we can just work through this example as we go through these courses and say, okay, for this household that we're presenting, how can we help them to get to a spot of financial stability, get out of debt, and start saving for retirement and their other financial goals? So in our example here, we've got a family of 4 with an $80,000 annual income. One of the spouse works outside the home as a driver at Creek Carrier in this example, and the other spouse stays home and doesn't have a job outside of the home. The employee contributes 5% to the 401k at Creek Carrier to achieve the full company match. Creek Carrier offers a 10 cents on the dollar match on your first 5% of 401k contributions. So we would recommend that you take advantage of that. That's free money on the table that the company will give you just for contributing 5% to your 401k. So we recommend that for drivers at Creek Carrier, and we're going to include that in our example here. When we do the calculation on this example for net take-home pay, we take out the taxes, the 401k, medical, dental, vision insurance, and after we do all that, the average take-home pay on this particular example would be about $1,000 per pay period, or $1,000 of take-home pay a week. When we talked about doing the 4 periods in our budget every month, that would be $4,000 a month. So that's kind of what we're working with as we go through our example here. Okay, so here we've got an example of our budget items here, and we're just going to go over here to look at one that we've already completed here with our examples of income and expenses like we laid out in our example. So we start out with the $4,000 of take-home income like we mentioned, and we'll take that and put that in our income category. Then as we go through and look at our expenses, we kind of have them bucketed out in the different areas that we'll look at. First we have the housing category, so that's where we put our mortgage and rent payments, a lot of our utilities, the electricity, the cable internet, household supplies, things like that. You'll see here that also in each of these categories we have a column for projected costs. That's where we'll put all our budgeted amounts. And then as you use this to go through your month, you'll start to track your actual costs. That way you know throughout any given point in the month how much money is left in your budget from what you budgeted to what you've actually spent so far. So that's kind of how the template works in this regard. There's another category for transportation. That's where your car and pickup truck payments might go, your gas for those vehicles, maintenance, things like that. We have some spots for insurance costs. You'll see here we have a little bit for life insurance. If you have dependents that, and we'll talk about this in a later slide as well, but if you have dependents that are dependent on your income, it's always a good idea to have some life insurance to make sure that you take care of them in case something unexpected happens. So we just have an amount there for that of a premium of life insurance for each month. Some of the other categories here, your food, that's where your groceries and dining out will go. Back up to the top. You can see there also we have some entertainment expenses. That way you're still having a little bit of enjoyment as you go through this process and try to cut down a lot of expenses. We do want you to have a little bit of time for entertainment purposes to continue doing things like that. And then there's our loan payments, which we will talk about as being the minimum payments. I know Cindy laid out those earlier as far as what in our example we had for debt. But these are the minimum payments that we're hoping to pay down. Hopefully we can get our budget to a spot where we have enough income to pay extra on those notes and get that expense taken off as quickly as possible. So then you can kind of see how that all works through. It comes down to the bottom, and we've got our projected cost at $4,000 as well. Therefore, our income is balancing with our expenses in this particular budget line item. So again, this might not be exactly what your scenario is, but it's just kind of an example to lay out. Here's what it could look like, and here's how you could balance a budget at this particular level. So the other thing I want to show you on here on this Excel spreadsheet, and this is one too where we'll have some information at the end of the presentation how you can get these materials. We have some paper materials to provide with some of this information, as well as this Excel sheet if you so would choose to use this in your personal situation. But here we've got some kind of a ledger, I guess you could say, where we go through each of those expenses, and we realize that as you go through a month, you might have more than one transaction in each of those budget categories. So we wanted to give you a way to use that and track those to say, okay, I've gone through and I've bought household supplies 3 times this month. If I add those up, what has been my actual cost? I can keep a running total of that and then go ahead and compare that to my actual budget amount. So we have that on there for you as well with several of these different categories. We also have recommended expenses here for you. This is just some guidelines. It might not be exactly what yours looks like at this point in time, but sometimes people, when they first start to budget, they just want to know if they're on the right track or if they're in the norm. These are just some suggestions for what might be a possible realm of each of these budget categories to say, this should be the percentage of my total expense budget that would go in each of these categories. So just something to use as a guideline. And then we talked about lump sum payments earlier as that third expense category. We did want to give us some examples of that. So we laid out a bunch of those here. This is not an all-inclusive list by any means, but it does provide you with a lot of different items here that you can think about saying, okay, I know I don't have these things every month, but throughout the year, I know these are going to pop up at some point. And so these are ways to just kind of track that and get you thinking in that area to what else you might have that's not a recurring expense. And then finally, we have that same budget for you here, just a blank version of it so you can fill it in as you see fit for your own personal situation. So just wanted to show you that kind of real life example of some of the budget materials that we have here available at your request. Okay, so just want to move on then to the last couple slides of our presentation here in this first session. And I just want to talk about what this would look like in terms of compound interest. So, we talked about the debt in this example, this person's debt, and what those minimum payments added up to. Basically, that was about $950 every month that they were paying, just making the minimum payments on those debt payments, the 2 credit cards, the car payment, and the pickup truck payment that we had laid out in an earlier slide. If we took that $950 a month, so that's 12 months a year, you'd have $11,400 for a year. And we took that and invested it instead for retirement, let's say, invested it for retirement. And we're assuming we could get a 9% growth on that. If you look at what that turns into over time, so if you looked at over 30 years of doing that, putting that $950 away every month instead of paying down debt with it, that turns into over $1.5 million that you might have available for you as a nest egg in your retirement. So you can see how much that really turns into a big number just by making that change from living in debt to living without debt and being able to invest that instead. And you might say, well, that's great, but I don't have 30 years left to retirement anymore. Well, let's even look down to the 10 or 15 year numbers. Like, let's say you have 10 years left to retirement. You can still turn that into almost $175,000 in this example before retirement. And that may not sound as much as the 1.5 million, but that's still a lot better than having zero and having still a whole bunch of debt on your books as well. So no matter what stage of your career you're in, it always makes sense to work on getting that debt paid down and getting to a spot where you are able to save for retirement, because it can turn into a big positive over time. So I want to throw in one more example to sweeten the pot just even a little more as we look at these calculations in this example. So we have our driver here, Creek Carrier employee, with annual wages of about $80,000. And the average profit sharing and match percentage in this example would be about 5.6%. So the company's paying out profit sharing typically and matching that 401k that we talked about earlier comes out to about 5.6% of the annual wages, which, if you do the math on that, would be an annual benefit of about $4,480 a year. In addition to that, we talked about putting away that 5%. So that's 5% of your wages you're putting away of your own money, in addition to that match that the company is giving you. So that's $4,000 that you're putting towards your retirement right there. And then you have that $11,400, which we just looked at on the previous slide, assuming we could get that debt paid off and use that to put towards retirement as well. So you add all that together, you can now put away $19,880 a year towards your retirement and invest that. If you do that, you can see this compound interest factor gets that much bigger. That 30-year number that we said was 1.5 million before, if you look on this slide, that's now 2.7 million. And if you look at the difference between the green bar and the blue bar, At that point in time, you will have taken advantage of about $610,000 worth of company money. That's profit sharing and match that the company put in. That's free money that they're giving you on top of your wages that was then invested and grew to that number of over $600,000. So over that long period of time, you can see how much that works. And then if we go back to that 10-year number, like we referenced before, even if you're not, if you don't have 30 years left until your retirement, even if you go back to that 10-year number, you can get that retirement nest egg up to $300,000. So once again, $300,000 being a nice sized number compared to having zero and saddled with a bunch of debt. So I know when I first started looking at some of these things, this was something that got me pretty excited, this compound interest factor. And so I wanted to make sure we presented that and shared that with you today to see the impact that these small changes in your financial lifestyle can really have over time especially.
So with that, what we want you to do before you start the next class is to really go through and prepare your own budget. So go through some bank statements, credit card statements, really understand kind of what those budget items should be and start getting those down. Your first budget won't be perfect by any means. You're going to forget something, you're going to under budget something, over budget something. So that's to be expected, but just getting started. And then after that, it's just going to be tweaking it from month to month. So start that. And then we really like to have everybody to have at least $1,000 in emergency fund, because it seems like when you're in debt and you try to start paying off and you get momentum, something breaks down. Your car breaks down or your dishwasher or something happens. So we like to have $1,000 in the emergency fund just to handle those so it doesn't derail our debt repayment. So really start saving towards that $1,000 emergency fund if you don't already have one. So, and then we will talk to you next class.
Thanks, everybody.
For more information about managing your debt or budgeting, email us at financialwellness@creekcarrier.com.